The conspiracy theory going around is that POCO named their first X series phone the POCO X2 instead of the POCO X to directly take on the Realme X2. So how does the POCO X2 stack up to our C4E award-winning Realme X2? Which is the better X2? Let's find out in today's video. Hey guys, Ash here from C4E Tech, and if you do end up liking what you see here, please subscribe and turn on notifications by hitting that bell icon. Let's now get this comparison video started. Before we begin, I am giving away a POCO X2 currently. To know more about that giveaway, check out the link in the description below. Starting with design, on paper, both the X2s have glass sandwich designs protected by Gorilla Glass 5 on either side. But visually, they couldn't be any more different. On one hand, we have the POCO X2 centrally placed rear cameras here with a circular 3D-esque ring around it, a subtle gradient finish, there's POCO branding to the bottom. On the other hand, we have the Realme X2. It's got the Realme design language stamped all over it, cameras to his side with a horizontal Realme logo underneath it. A striking finish, it creates these different patterns when it catches the light in just the right way. While the Realme X2 is more flamboyant here, the POCO X2 has a design that we've not seen quite so much. That said, there is more to build than just the design. Comparing the two X2s side by side, POCO does have the larger footprint. It's a fair bit taller, thicker, and just a tad wider as well. It also happens to be the heavier phone. The X2, or rather the POCO X2, weighs around 210 grams, which is about 25 grams heavier than the Realme X2. So the in-hand feel of the Realme, it's better. It's lighter and easy to wield one-handed, although thanks to these large displays, neither phone is meant to be used single-handed. The POCO X2 though does have an advantage of its own here. It's got that P2i nano coating that allows it to be splash resistant. Now turning these phones around, the difference is they continue to pile up. The POCO X2 has the larger screen, 6.67 inches compared to 6.4 on the Realme. It's not just the sizes either. Barring the similar Full HD Plus resolutions, they're very different displays. The Realme X2 has an AMOLED panel with a water drop notch. AMOLED does entail inky blacks and infinite contrast along with the vibrant colors, but the refresh rate of this display, it's the standard 60 Hz. On the other hand, the POCO X2's display, it's double that at 120 Hz. The technology though, it's IPS LCD, it's still a pretty vibrant display. It's got a couple of punch holes up top with the pixels in between blacked out to give a S10 Plus kinda long cutout vibe. So like with the built-in design, here with the display too, both the X2s have their own pros and cons. And what's better, this boils down to personal preference again. My 2 cents, if you're someone who watches videos more, if you consume media more, then the AMOLED might be something you'd appreciate. But if you're more into gaming and want that fluid smoothness when you move around the interface, then the faster refresh of the POCO X2 would be ideal for you. We've been focusing on the differences quite a bit so far, so let's now, for a change, take a look at what the similarities are. Because these two phones, they do have quite a bit of similarities. They do sport identical internals. We have the same Snapdragon 730G powering both phones, and that's paired with 6 or 8 gigs of RAM along with 64, 128 or 256 gigs of internal storage on the POCO X2. On the other hand, we have 4, 6 and 8 gig RAM variants of the Realme X2 coupled with 64 or 128 gigs of onboard storage. Both phones come with support for microSD expansion, but it's only the Realme X2 that has a dedicated card slot. Now you'd expect with such similar hardware, the performance on both phones would also be similar, right? Not quite. With the frame rate set to 120 Hz, we sometimes notice tiny micro stutters or frame drops on the POCO X2. However, even with those present, the user interface on the POCO felt snappier than the interface on the Realme. The faster refresh rate on the POCO seemed to make everything just that tiny bit faster. It's very hard to show on camera, but in hand, you can definitely feel the difference between these two. When it comes to gaming, both phones perform exceptionally well, no frame drops or stutters here, but the higher refresh rate screen on the POCO X2 meant that with games that support the higher refresh rate, the gameplay, it feels much smoother. Especially with first-person shooters like Modern Combat Versus, it was pretty noticeable. Even in reaction-based games like Mortal Kombat, the POCO excelled. The touch response, it felt almost instantaneous. So if you're someone who plays a lot of games, the POCO X2 is your obvious choice. Overall, the performance round ends in a convincing victory for the POCO X2. With battery life, the POCO X2 again has an edge since the battery capacity is 12.5% higher. The 4000 mAh unit on the Realme X2 is quite respectable, and it easily lasts us through a full day on a single charge. Now I expect the POCO X2 to do a bit better. Now when it comes to charging, we have an included 27-watt fast charger with the POCO X2 that can get the 4500 mAh battery inside from 0 to 100 within an hour and 10 minutes. That's pretty fast, and even the 30-watt VOOC 4.0 charger takes around the same time to charge the 4000 mAh battery on the Realme X2. That said, when it comes to quick top-ups, the VOOC 4.0 does take the lead, with it being able to charge 68% in half hour, while the POCO, it goes to about 61%. Now, even then, personally, I would prefer longer lasting battery life over marginally quicker top-up times. Again, it's just percentages. The battery capacity is higher on the X2, so it's about the same charge speeds. Any which ways, this round, it goes to the POCO X2. I'm about to say X2 because every time when we are generally doing comparisons, we just talk about the second part of the name, not the brand name. Because both are X2s, it kind of becomes a point where I stutter, so sorry about that, guys. Any which ways, coming to the software side of things, we have ColorOS 6.1 based on Android 9 Pie running on the Realme X2, while the POCO X2, it's running on MIUI 11 based on the latest Android 10. Now this being a POCO, we get some POCO specific functionality like the POCO launcher preloaded on top of MIUI 11. POCO also have promised fast updates as well as no ads. On the other hand, Realme have launched their Realme UI, which is supposed to be coming to the Realme X2 quite soon. So I guess once that update does arrive, it will be more of an even comparison. Bottom line, both interfaces are fast. The POCO has an edge, for the moment at least, because it's on Android 10. Let's now round up the sundries before we head into optics. First up, we have the fingerprint scanners. Thanks to the panel being AMOLED, the fingerprint scanner is under the display on the Realme X2, and it's really fast. In fact, almost as fast as the capacitive scanner on the POCO X2. Personally, I feel front-facing scanners are more convenient, and thus the Realme X2 has an edge here. But again, that's personal preference. Here's a poll. Let me know what you actually prefer. The POCO X2 hits back with an IR blaster and FM radio support, both of which are found lacking on the Realme X2. As far as audio quality goes, again, this is a win for the Realme X2. The sound output's much better via both the headphone jack as well as the bottom firing speaker. That could be thanks in large to the Dolby Atmos on both the Realme X2. In fact, side by side, the speaker on the POCO sounds quite tinny. Moving on to cameras, both the X2s have similar rear camera setups. We have a 64 megapixel primary sensor on both phones, while Realme have gone with Samsung's ISOCELL Bright GW1 sensor paired with a f1.8 lens. POCO's gone with the brand new Sony IMX686 sensor with a f1.9 lens. Under bright light, both take good looking pictures, although the Sony sensor does come out ahead in most situations. For example, the dynamic range is better. We can see it clearly in photos like this one, where in the shadows you can see the leaves of the tree being crushed on the Realme X2, while the POCO brings out the details in them quite beautifully. The IMX686 also tends to shoot crisper shots with finer details, like say with the flower here. That said, the POCO X2 does tend to amp up saturation a bit, but some people do like that. Under low light, both phones also have dedicated night modes, and side by side the POCO continues to outperform the Realme by shooting brighter images. It also retains better colors, and like we see here, the green of the leaves, it's just better. Zooming in, the POCO retains more details. There is some noise, but I feel it's still a worthy trade-off. So when it comes to the primary cameras, it's the POCO X2. Now moving on to the secondary, both phones have an 8 megapixel ultra-wide, and the picture quality is quite comparable. That said, the POCO X2 does exhibit a better balance between the highlights and shadows along with punchier colors compared to the Realme X2. The ultra-wide on the Realme X2 does come with a night mode. The results are nothing to write home about, but it is still a nice option to have. Next up, there's the 2 megapixel macro option on both phones. Interesting in concept, but the shots taken by them lack in sharpness and sometimes tend to come out a bit dark. Between these two though, the POCO X2 edges ahead in terms of detail. Finally, the last sensor on the list, it's a 2 megapixel depth sensor. Comparing the rear portraits side by side, both X2s have done well enough, especially when it comes to the edge detection part of portraits. Now moving on to the selfie camera, we have a 32 megapixel single snapper on the Realme X2, while POCO's gone for dual selfie shooters, a 20 megapixel primary coupled with another 2 megapixel depth sensor. At first glance, the pictures taken by the POCO might look sharper since the pictures from the Realme X2 do come out looking kinda soft, but zoom in and we can spot some over sharpening on the POCO X2. When it comes to selfie portraits, it doesn't really look like the 2 megapixel depth sensor is helping out much, at least as of now. Weirdly enough, in some instances, the edge reduction is actually better with the Realme X2. Both phones can capture 4K videos. The POCO seems to shoot brighter, sharper, and even more stabilized footage. Seems like electronic stabilization even works at 4K on the POCO X2. Both phones have an option to shoot at 1080p 60. Despite the drop in resolution, the videos still remain quite detailed. Now the X2 comes with an ultra steady video option and it eliminates almost all shakes and tremors, but that does come in at an expense of detail. Another feature that Realme has provided is portrait video for both the rear as well as front cameras, something that POCO cannot match, at least not as of now. And oh yeah, the front camera also has EIS with the Realme X2, so it's definitely the better option for vlogging and gives the Realme X2 an advantage when it comes to videography. So with optics, the POCO X2 does better with still images via the rear cameras. The Realme X2 does fare better with selfies and videos for the most part. There are quite a few videography features like portrait video and extensive EIS that should appeal to Instagram and TikTok creators. So finally, let's talk pricing. The base variant of the POCO X2 comes at 16,000 rupees. That's for the 664 variant. The Realme X2 that starts at 1,000 rupees more, and that's for the 464 variant. So is the Realme X2 worth paying 1,000 rupees more and sacrificing 2 gigs of RAM? Well, not unless you really like AMOLED screens, want the faster VOOC 4.0 charging, love taking selfies, and need the unique video features. If these are important to you, then the Realme X2 would make you happy. Now, if you eventually see price cuts on the Realme X2, which Realme tends to do once there is competition, if you see a couple of thousand rupees cut on the Realme X2, then maybe you could consider it. But as of now, if you're looking for a phone that feels really snappy, games pretty well, has outstanding battery life, and does better at photography than most phones in its range, then the POCO X2 is probably the phone for you. In my opinion, it is the better all-round phone and it comes in at a cheaper price tag, making it better value as well. So it is one of the easiest phones to recommend for anyone looking for a device around the 15,000 rupee mark. And that is my take on the two X2s. Now I want to know which of these two would you choose. What is your X2 preference? Leave a comment down below letting me know. And I guess with that, we are at the end of this video. It is now time I bid you adieu. Thumbs up, thumbs down based on what you felt about this video. Subscribe, turn on notifications by hitting that bell icon if you haven't yet. Thanks a lot for watching. Till next time, my name's Ash. You've been watching C4 Retech and I'm signing off for now. You guys have a great day. Bye-bye.